Story number 1. A Disney Mascot Followed Me Home by Reddit user Creeps McPasta. When I was young, it was every kid's dream to go to Disneyland. The advertisements raged on constantly between Saturday morning cartoons and the summer holidays were coming up, so you know every kid was asking their parents to take them, and you know I was one of them. My parents always kept quiet about it, never giving a straight answer. I was close to giving up on the dream of going to the Magic Kingdom until they pulled me aside before the end of the school term. "Adam," they said, "we've been hearing great things from your teachers this year, and your grades have improved so much. We are very proud of you, so we saved money aside and we're taking you to Disneyland." How should a kid react? Thank their parents politely and profusely? Express their love joyously? Well, being 8 and having a low emotional constitution, I simply broke down and cried. It was the happiest moment ever that I can remember, and will probably never be topped. How can you ever top such wholehearted, innocent childhood glee? The time just slipped by until we were on the plane to Paris. Life was a happy blur until the vivid memory of the magnificent entrance to the park. It was everything any kid could wish for. I tried my best to do everything. Honestly, the energy kids have is astounding looking back. My parents must have been heavily exhausted trying to keep up, yet they never faltered knowing it was bringing me lasting joy, and for that I am grateful. However, it had cost them a pretty penny for the whole trip, and one memory stands out to me, which is the reason why I'm writing this. We were at the gift shop, and they were picking up various merchandise and suggesting we buy it as a souvenir. Everything they picked up were simple little trinkets, little keychains, fridge magnets, and other little pieces. I wasn't having any of it. It wasn't enough to encapsulate my feelings for the trip. I kept going back to an intricate glass figurine of a beautiful Disney character. I can't even say which one because it's been so long, and there's a more detailed part of the story that is more ingrained in my memory. The figure cost around €120, which was a lot for the time. Way too much for my parents. They obviously said no every time, and this next part saddens me. I became irate. I still remember the embarrassed look on their faces. We left without buying anything, and I was left with no souvenir. Or so they thought. What they didn't know is later that day I went back into the shop. I was 8, so I was small enough to duck behind the shelves without looking too suspicious. I reached over to the figurine and hid it in my Mickey Mouse hat. I looked over to the shopkeeper, and he was busy with a customer. The other customers didn't notice, and I thought I got away with it until I noticed far out of the door there was a mascot facing my direction. At first I thought he saw me, but in my mind I figured he couldn't have. I reasoned that the visibility in those things was terrible, and that he was probably just facing the store because he was trying to attract new customers in, and thanking customers who left. When I walked past, he simply turned his head as I made my way back to my parents. He made no attempts to confront me. Past then, my memory fades. I simply went back to being a kid in school, sharing memories with the other kids who managed to go for the holidays, and scoffing at the kids who never managed to go. It's an amusing concept looking back, but it created an almost serious dichotomy back in the day. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I started seeing some weird things happen. It was small at first. I would be playing in the schoolyard, and from behind a tree far off in the distance, I would see what I thought was a thin black arm with a novelty-sized white glove slipped behind it. A strange sight to see. However, there were white pigeons in that area, and it was dark in that part of the woods, so it was easy to explain it away. And this continued from then on. Each time I would rationalize in my mind. However, it didn't take long until it was getting harder to do so. Sometimes I would see the top of 2 black domes hiding behind a wall, before slipping down out of sight. I would peek over to see what it was, and then see nothing, with nowhere anything could hide. I tried being faster, however, I could never catch a full glimpse of the thing. There was one thing I could piece together, though. Based on all the parts I had been seeing, it was definitely a Mickey Mouse mascot. The one instance that really scared me, so much that I started screaming, was at night when I was tucked into bed. I turned my head nonchalantly, and through my window I could see the iconic Mickey Mouse ears and the top half of its eyes. This was the most I'd ever seen of its face, and I instantly panicked. I did everything under a kid's arsenal to get help. I ran around, I screamed, I cried. I made as much noise as possible. In record time, my parents ran in and they tried to calm me down. They kept asking what happened, and all I could do was point to the window and garble out a mess of sounds. We all turned to the window and saw nothing. From then on, I was actively scared of anything Disney. Other kids would have their Disney toys, and I would shy away. They would bring up the Disney movie they saw the night before, and I would try to turn the conversation onto another topic. I got rid of anything I had that was remotely Disney, anything to ease my mind and erase the trauma that I had experienced. It never worked, but it helped, a little. After all that, things calmed down. I feel I would be close to seeing something disturbing, but it'd be out of sight as soon as my eyes focused. Still, though, it never eased the paranoia, something that haunted me every day. I felt I was getting close to forgetting about all this and living with the residing feeling after that traumatic event until high school, when my best friend's birthday was coming up. Disney was still a popular topic, despite us having grown up since the hype. He decided to organize a Disney trip and bring 2 friends, one of those kids that had parents who could afford to do such a grand gesture. I tried to deny the invitation, but he was my best friend, and wouldn't take no for an answer. I tried getting my parents to pull me out, but they thought I was just being nervous about the flight, so it wasn't long until I was boarding a flight to my literal nightmare. The group consisted of my best friend, one of his friends, his parents, and me. As soon as we settled in, we were off to have our grand adventure. It didn't take long until we split up to do our own things for a bit, with a time and place to meet up afterwards. I strolled around the park, trying to mind my own business and avoid the mascots. It hadn't been so long that I was ready to let down my guard in front of them, despite the friendly setting. It was odd, but every time I walked past a mascot, I swear they would briefly drop what they were doing, whether they were promoting merchandise or talking to a kid, and just stare at me as I passed. They just turned their heads slowly, their novelty-sized eyes glaring at me, cold and dead. At night, I tried to feel safe. I locked my door, tucked under my blanket, and tried to sleep the night away. However, I couldn't. The light seeping in through the open curtain perturbed me, and briefly reminded me of that night so long ago. I figured it couldn't happen again if I fully shut my curtain. So I went over to do so, and as I grabbed each side to draw them shut, I noticed something in the distance. Standing in the middle of the grounds, completely in the open, was a mascot. It was Mickey, just standing there. If it wasn't so far away, I could have sworn it was looking at my window. I stared at it for a bit. It was just glaring and unmoving. My heart started to race. I was scared to look away, but eventually I developed a resolve and finally pulled the curtain shut as hard as I could. I raced back to my bed and wrapped myself up tight so that any childish fears couldn't penetrate, and I slept to the gentle sound of something soft brushing against my window. The next morning I woke up exhausted. My friends, on the other hand, were sprightly awake and ready for a day of action. Obviously, I tried bringing up the night before, but you can never fully convey anything as simple as a mascot standing unmoving in a theme park without getting a simple answer. It was probably just an empty costume left out. It was probably a mascot on break. I was probably just dreaming it. Seems it's easy to believe the simple solution than to humor the terrifying one. I stayed alert for the rest of the trip, pretending to enjoy the place around my friends and parents, and keeping a low profile while alone. It felt like an eternity, but I at least made it home in one piece. I wanted to say things calmed down from here, but they don't. It actually got worse. The mascot that haunted my childhood seemed to stop bothering to hide. I would catch it just standing out in the open, taunting me with its presence. When my parents drove me to school, I would catch glimpses of Mickey Mouse facing the direction of the car between alleys. While I'd be out shopping, it would just be standing behind a moving crowd, slowly holding out its hand before fading away behind the hustle. I distinctly remember one instance in my mom's office building. It was some learning experience week at school, and I decided to work as a runner in my mom's office for a week. The elevators there had these narrow porthole windows to view each floor as you passed them, while with others they functioned exactly as intended. However, in the brief instance I was alone, I saw snapshots of Mickey flash by each floor. I freaked out at this, terrified for my life, dreading the time in which the elevator would stop. The worst was at night. If I forgot to close my curtains, I would just see that horrifically sized head just staring at me through the window. I couldn't call someone. Why bother? It would just slip away as soon as they came. Trying to take a picture ended in the same result. A running motif over time was his hand. I would sometimes see him either raising it palm side up or it would already be held out, almost as if it wanted something. It didn't take me long to think of a solution. The figurine that I had stolen all those years ago. I frantically rummaged through my old childhood items, toys, books, and the like. Of course, I couldn't find anything Disney. I had gotten rid of everything as a child when I was terrified for my life. I no doubt had gotten rid of the figurine as well, and I was mortified at this thought. My next idea was a simple one. While at school the next day, I went to the library and Googled the exchange rate of the euro for the year I went to Disney and scraped up my pocket money. I had the right amount, so I did something any other kid would think was crazy. I left it out on my doorstep. I know that anyone could take it, but if it was gone in the morning, I'd at least have some hope that it would appease this nightmare. I left the money on my doorstep under a note apologizing for what I did. I placed a small rock on it to keep it from blowing away, and I went to bed. That night I did something that terrified me as a kid. I slept with the curtains open. I wanted to wait until it was late and see if that horrific icon would be staring at me. I woke up in the dark hours of the morning. I took a few deep breaths for courage, closed my eyes with a quick prayer, and spun around to check. Nothing. Was it over? Had I managed to end years of torment? I walked over to my window to see if there was any signs of the thing, gaining steady confidence with each step. I was excited. Excited to live a life without flinching at every possible hiding spot. Excited to leave the house confidently. Excited to have my independence back. This all ended when I stared into my garden. There it was, staring as it did in my second trip to Disneyland. I stared back, not only in horror, but sadness. Sadness that my newfound confidence and excitement was crushed so quickly. As I looked on, it raised its hand, and that's when I realized something. Maybe it's not holding its hand out for the item back, or any kind of repayment. Maybe it's holding its hand out for me. I know this sounds insane, but I may take it up. Maybe it wants to tell me something, or even just show me something. Whatever the case, I just need all this to be done. If this ends here, presume the worst. Story number 2. I was an undercover security officer at Walt Disney World, and I found their darkest secret. By Reddit user, Illuminati. Good morning. I'm writing this on my phone, so please have patience with any grammatical or formatting errors. This post got removed originally, and I messaged the mods, and they said that they had no idea how it happened, but I've been finding small silhouettes of Mickey Mouse outside my house. Here's the repost, and an update is in the works. To start off with, I now reside in a completely different state after leaving my job with the Walt Disney World Resort in Orlando. I used to be what one other Redditor would describe as a quote-unquote suit. I am one of the guys that walks around the park in plain sight, yet hidden to the public. I am part of the elite group of black polo sporting undercover security officers that specializes in worse things than shoplifters and unruly park guests. You see, if you're at Disney World and you spot more than a few guys in one place wearing black polos, then you're most likely in danger and you should probably leave the area immediately. The sad part is we're so good at blending in with the woodwork that you wouldn't even notice us. Anyway, let me cut to the chase here. I have seen some pretty weird things at Disney World during my time, and these anomalies that everyone speaks of, well, they are true, but the least of our concerns. You see, the thing is, when you take hundreds of thousands of people and cram them into a relatively small space, weird shit is bound to happen. We have had kids and even adults get lost in the park. Cryptozoological sightings, alien sightings, ghost sightings, and just general unexplainable things happen all the time here. I was a senior special security officer during the height of my time there, and got called for some pretty dark shit. Many of you think we, as in the security detail I was in, were covering up for Disney Corp. But in our true nature, we were damage control, and we were mostly kept out of the loop on things, and we were also trained not to question, but to defuse. There was one thing, though, that to this day still bothers me. A cast member called us on the Nextel to report that a group of 4 children had gone missing on the land. Of course, I first thought another one of those anomalies. For those of you who don't know the eerily calming nature ride called Living with the Land, it is located in the Land and Sea Pavilion over by Soarin'. The odd thing about this report is that we have never received one of these complaints before, and of course we are issued to cover up stories to tell cast members or guests to calm them down. My colleague calmly came up with a story and explained that the kids were part of an educational program and they exited the boat with a guide and were escorted into the botany lab that exists on that side. I told her not to ask any questions or talk about the incident as to not spread false rumors, and had my colleague escort her to a nearby security office to have her sign some forms. And, well, during that time, my human nature took over, and I got curious and entered the ride on the next boat alone. Living with the Land is boring and not particularly popular, so I can understand how the kids would be on the boat alone, and also how I could get on the boat by myself. I noticed absolutely nothing until I came to the part of the ride that was the Prairie Farmhouse. It looked like a fake house, but something about it just never sat right with me. As I have done hundreds of times before on rides, I jumped off the boat and onto the scene where the house is. I noticed something funny, though. There were no pressure mats and the boat went away, allotting about a good 30 seconds before the next boat got to the scene. I have never seen a ride with no pressure mats to detect if anyone disembarked a ride. So, quick recap. Kids disappear on ride. I show up and feed the cast member who reported it some story about how they disembarked mid-ride and are currently on a tour of the lab. I contacted the new cast member operating the ride and told him to put some space between the next boat and me as I am looking for a lost wedding ring. Bullshit, I know, but so what? It's my job. I slowly started to walk up to the fake house. Climbing the steps up to the porch, I noticed an emblem on the left window. It's a small square and compass symbol. Interesting that a Masonic symbol is hidden here. I figure whoever built the ride was a Freemason and brushed it off. I looked into the windows of the house, and it was nothing but curtains with black plywood behind them. I thought that there was nothing else to see here, but still something inside me decided it wasn't good enough. The front door glided open to a bright room with a black and white checkerboard floor. There was a marble altar-like table on the opposite end of the room with some kind of weird throne-like chair built into the front of it. The only other thing that was noticeable was a heavy wooden door on the other end of the room that was locked. There was no windows or anything else. I thought it was weird because I was always under the impression that this house was fake. Human nature took over again, and against my better judgment, I tried the door on the other side of the room, but when it was locked, I was a bit relieved. I tried my keys, but none of them worked. Here's the thing. At Disney, we use a lock system called BEST. This had interchangeable cores that have assigned numbers and/or letters. This is so we can issue keys only to certain areas. We have the General Master Key, which essentially is the real key to the kingdom. Interesting thing about this lock was that my master didn't open it. I looked closer and it was a BEST lock, but the inscription said CC on it, which I have never seen before. Since the door wasn't open, I decided just to leave. On the way out, I noticed on the floor that there was a fast pass printed out for Soren. I picked it up and pocketed it. It's amazing how trash works its way into odd places. I'm going to figure out where these kids went. I rode the boat back out to the platform and went back to the Epcot security office to play back some footage from the DVR. It took me a while, but I zeroed in on the period where the kids entered the Land and Sea Pavilion and followed them. There were 4 kids total, 3 girls and 1 boy. The girls' actions were almost robotic, and it sent a chill up my spine. They walked in a straight line through the pavilion, but what scared me was there was a man with them escorting them through the place. I paused and looked closer when I realized that the man was wearing a black polo and khakis, the same thing I was wearing. Holy shit, I even recognized him. It was one of my colleagues. Alan is the guy that was on the scene before I got there. The same guy who fed the cast member at the control podium the bullshit story about the kids going on a tour. I thought maybe he did actually send them on the tour of the botany lab and lost track of them, until I hit play on the film. The boy was not walking in line, and I could tell he was giving Alan problems. He keeps venturing away and getting distracted by various things in the pavilion. The benefit of the doubt that I gave Alan subsided when I saw the kid go press a button for the fast pass on Soren and take the paper pass almost like a prize. Alan then tugged him away and stood back and observed as the kids walked to living with the land. I saw them get on the boat. I saw them go through the storm scene, through the rainforest scene, then through the desert scene. After the desert, I lost the boat on camera. The ride stopped momentarily. You could see it on the other scenes, and once it resumed, I saw the boat again in the scene with the pictures of the farmers. The boat was empty. I also saw freaking Alan looking down off the observation deck, which explains how he responded so quickly. I switched the cameras back to the live view, and then I left that area. I haven't been exactly honest with you this far. I know a lot of things of what Disney does, and things that we respond to that a regular security officer wouldn't deal with. I have seen them experiment so many things, such as eugenics, pharmaceutical engineering, and even experimenting with gas. Have you ever noticed that on both Spaceship Earth and the monorail that you get a strange calm feeling on those rides? Well, they were pumping low doses of laughing gas in those areas. Ever heard of Room Zero? They were wearing gas masks for a reason. Ever hear of gas cots? Well, that's not important right now. I would encourage you to research it. I never for once thought that what we did was okay by containing these dark secrets, but it paid well. I have seen them quickly inject some experimental drug on guests and then throw them back out. Our job was to mentor and contain them if things went haywire. I know that I'm the bad guy, but this wasn't normal. This was not procedure. First thing I did was go over to the room where we kept the keys. I looked through the logbooks for the core labeled CC. I found it, but it had no zone or specific location issued to the core, and the number of copies was marked as 1. This key was in our system, but my master key didn't open it. I grabbed the core key and a few Zone 1 cores. The core key is a specific key that, when inserted into the lock, will remove the core, so it can be replaced with another. I put this in my pocket and made a beeline for the Land and Sea Pavilion. I may be paranoid, but I swear I saw Alan following me in the shadows. I got to the ride and made my way back to the house and back in the front door to the Masonic room, and locked the front door as I entered. I inserted the core key into the lock on the wooden door, removed the core, and inserted the Zone 1 core into the lock. Now my master key will open the door, and boy did it. The door glided open. It was heavy and made out of steel on the other side of the wood face. There was a velvet red carpet staircase leading down to some kind of altador. What the hell? I descended the stairs and walked down the red carpeted hallway to these double doors. Behind these doors was my answer to the truth as to what happened to these kids. Through these doors was the darkest side of Disney. A side of Disney that even I couldn't believe. Would Walt Disney be in favor of this? Or is this one of Eisner's little ideas for making more money off the guests? Behind these doors was an empty, dimly lit room with a small circular platform in the center. The carpet was the same lush red velvet carpet from the hallway, and there were 6 leather armchairs around the circular platform, all with telephones and card readers on the table next to the chair. Inside, I knew what was going on. I knew what was happening here. This is one thing I will not cover up for Disney Corp. I stood there in disbelief and horror when I noticed a small door toward the back of the room. I went over and popped out the CC core and put it in my pocket and put in a Zone 1 core. I heard someone clear their throat from the front of the room. It was Alan. He had an annoyed look on his face and held a gun trained at me. I slowly propped the door open on the latch and turned to face him. "You should never have come here," he said to me when he was stepping towards me. I looked at him and I said, "So this is what you and your scumbag friends resorted to. We did some pretty fucked up shit, Alan, but this is a new low for you and your disgusting friends." I had my hand at my side and blocked the view of me slipping the Zone 1 core out of the handle and into my pocket. He looked at me and said, "It's not going to matter because no one is going to find out." He raised his gun, and, like something out of an action movie, I ripped the door open as he pulled the trigger as the bullet hit the door. I jumped backwards through the doorway and shut it behind me. That asshole was stuck because I had both cores in my pocket, so there was no way he could even open the door. He started shooting the door, and I moved forward. I walked down a hallway with these small cell-like rooms lining the hall, and inside were those play school chairs and a few toys. I checked every one of them, and they were all empty. I got to the end of the hall, and there was a huge metal vault-like door. I popped the last Zone 1 core into the door and replaced the CC core and pulled the steel door open to be hit in the face with sunlight. I was outside on some side utility road off the premises of Epcot. The road led away. I was too late. They were already gone. For good. I called the police, but they never came. I called the FBI, but they never took me seriously. Hell, I even called the CIA, but they said they didn't deal with domestic issues like that and referred me back to the FBI. I showed up at the Orange County Police Department headquarters, and they took a report, but I heard something fall in the trash when I was leaving. Disney is good at what they do. They are good at keeping secrets, and they are good at controlling any outside force that attempts to bring their secrets to light. I am lucky I saw the sunlight again, and am lucky to have had the time to leave the state before they got to me. If you go there, please keep your kids close. Watch out for the guys in black polos. They may be watching you, or they may just be responding to something that will put you in danger. As far as I know, they aren't the ones that pick out the merchandise. I don't even know who does that. Story number 3. Disney World. Maybe it isn't so happy after all. By Reddit user Dr. John Doyle. I wish I could say what I'm about to tell you was the product of imagination. My friend and I weren't on medication, hadn't had a sip of alcohol, and were completely free of any and all drugs during one of the scariest events of my life in the summer of 2008. My friend, let's just call him Rob, and I decided to go to Disney World with our girlfriends at the time. Unfortunately, our girlfriends decided they didn't want to go, but we still decided to go because we wanted to ride the rock and roller coaster 20 times. Yes, we did achieve this feat after making friends with a worker running the ride. From the very start of our day, something just felt off. I have since gone back numerous times, and it has felt fine. During this visit, though, there was a darkness over the park that I have yet to feel again. For our last night at Disney, we decided to utilize our extra magic hours. It was 1 a.m., and we were riding Splash Mountain for the 7th time in a row. We were having the best time making jokes and just being generally obnoxious in the melting pot of tourists. This last time we decided to ride Splash Mountain was different, though. As Rob and I were in the small line laughing and having fun, we both felt a presence come up behind us. As we turned to look, we saw a 60-plus-year-old gentleman. Excuse the stereotype, but he looked like a homeless veteran from the Vietnam War era. He was wearing a green Vietnam-era military jacket. He had no family with him, no friends. He was just by himself. Rob and I both felt the darkness of his presence as soon as he stood behind us, and all the joy and laughter we were experiencing was completely gone. As we moved in line, this man continued forward as well and stood behind us completely silent with his eyes staring at me like daggers. Finally, we get to board the ride. We were hopeful that we would get to escape this thief of joy, enjoy the ride, and move on with the rest of our evening. However, this was not the case. 2 preteen girls boarded the front row, the second row was left empty, Rob and I boarded the third row, and this gentleman was placed directly behind us in the fourth row. When this happened, our apprehension increased. I felt that death was on board this log. My heart was racing, and the look I was being given by Rob was telling. He looked absolutely terrified. Every time the log on this iconic ride dropped, the girls would scream with thrill, but Rob and I were silently petrified. The gentleman behind us sat still and stared at me. He had zero emotion. As crazy as it sounds, I actually felt as if he were there to kill me. Rob told me later that during the ride he was thinking of ways to stop this guy from trying to strangle or stab me. Every time we went into the dark on this ride, I saw my life flashing before my eyes and felt a dark presence like I've never felt before. With each turn I thought it could be my last, as this guy's presence further disturbed me and filled me with extreme anxiety. As the ride ended, this man continued sitting silent, still, and emotionless behind us. Rob and I were ready to leave the park ASAP. We got out of the log and went through the only possible exit. I wanted to see if the guy was following us, and so, as you see in every horror movie, I walked back to where the logs were unloading, wondering if the guy could be there. I wanted to see if he was anywhere behind us, but I couldn't find him. Rob and I couldn't find him anywhere. How could have he slipped by us? He stood out. There was no Mickey Mouse shirt or a fanny pack. This guy was clearly out of place. This is where people can view their picture that was taken during the ride after they get off. Rob walked over to it. I was anxious and ready to leave because of this experience and wondered why he cared. Suddenly, I saw all the blood drain from Rob's face. The man was not in the photograph. The seat that he sat in was there, but in the photo there was absolutely no one there. He wasn't in it. He wasn't in the log. I can't explain it, but he wasn't there. I was terrified. Rob was terrified. We both ran. We literally ran out of the park and got on the bus as fast as possible. Things were very eerie. Things were quiet. We felt like we were still being watched. At our hotel, no one was around. It seemed like everyone had checked in for the night except Rob and me. We immediately went to our room. We locked our door and stayed up all night praying to God for protection. What we experienced was real. The spirit world is very real and not to be played with. Why this spirit chose us, I cannot explain. However, this event opened my eyes and made me more aware of the things going on around us. To this day, I believe this was a demonic spirit, and it was my first encounter with a demon in the flesh. You may be religious, you may not be religious. You may hate the fact that I'm even bringing it up. However, my comfort is in my religion. I know that without God in my life, I would not have been able to handle this event. Rob is still shaken by it, as am I. But we have comfort knowing that the Spirit of God who is in both of us is greater than any dark spirit of this world, even a dark spirit that enjoys extra magic hours. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. Until next time.